In my entire life, I'm 36 years old. I have witnessed lots of wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Libya. I have never seen as much injustice as I am seeing today. My entire life, I haven't seen injustice in this amount. It's incredibly um, heartbreaking how they are dehumanizing and mistreating the Palestinians as if they are nothing but flies. In the past video, I said it seems that according to the civilized world and under the rules-based order, the flies have more rights and more respect than the Palestinians, which is heartbreaking, and their blood is not even considered worthy of any condemnation. The region is not what the Israelis claim to be. Because what the Israelis claim to be, that the rest are the savages, the barbarians, and we are the ones who are the civilized, and we have here the progressives and the multiculturals, blah, blah, blah. But that's not true. The real multiculturalism is in Syria, is in Iraq, is in Jordan, because multiculturalism in Syria is a natural progress. It's a natural development. There are centuries and centuries of different civilizations and empires came to Syria, and it happened to be a melting pot for these different civilizations. So you have Greek people in Syria, you have Roman people in Syria, you have different Islamic groups in Syria, Arabs, Aramaic, Akkadis, etc., etc. This is a clear cut in front of our eyes, an onslaught against the people, defenseless people, right? Defenseless people in in daylight, all documented on our TikToks, all documented on our mobiles, and then the politicians come and say Israel is only defending itself. I wanna, when I watch them, I have to puke, because what they're basically saying is that these people do not deserve to live. I always get the impression that they disrespect my intellectual capacity, because they don't see us in the Middle East as equal intellectually. Their minds are so colonized that they think they can teach us and preach, and they tell us how we should manage our affairs, etc., etc. And when you push back against their these silly attempts, they hate you. If I get killed by an Israeli anywhere, it's just like, okay, he died.
So, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. We have another guest today, Kevork Almassian of Syriana Analysis. So that's at least a YouTube channel. That's where I follow you, but I guess you're also on X, formerly known as Twitter, and probably other channels. And I wanted to invite you to our channel. We are usually talking about geopolitics, especially imperialism, all these kind of things. And I always think you have a very good analysis of things that are happening around the world, and especially also your part of the world. You're from Syria. But before we get into that, Kevork, I would like you maybe to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Yes. So my name is Kevork Almassian. My name Kevork is Greek, actually. It comes from George, and the translation to Armenian is Kevork. I'm a third generation survivor of the Armenian genocide. So 100 years ago, my grandparents fled the Ottoman Empire, and they found a safe haven in Syria, in Aleppo. And since then, we live in Aleppo, in the northern part of Syria. I was born and raised there. I went to school in Aleppo. And then when I graduated from my what they call the Abitur or baccalaureate. I chose to study international relations and diplomacy because I was very, very interested in international politics and what's happening around the world. I was one of the people who was, I used to wake up on Al Jazeera, sleep on Al Jazeera, have breakfast on Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera was my life since 1996. And I watched every documentary, every news segment per day. It was just like, I'm so interested in this. So I chose international relations, but at the beginning was very difficult for me. It was very new. Everything is new. It's mostly about theories, mostly about the foundations of international law and etc. But I got later, a few months later, very excited about continuing these studies, and also the dean supported me. And eventually, in the last year, I had the highest GPA in the Faculty of International Relations of Diplomacy and Diplomacy. So the university sent me to Paris for 1 year exchange students program called Erasmus in Paris. I studied in Sciences Po European Affairs. And when I came back, I enrolled in Lebanon. I wanted to continue master in political science with focus on Middle Eastern politics. I finished every course. I got 85 out of 100. Let's say my grades are high, but my graduation project never been approved because the advisor or the supervisor, he didn't put his signature on my graduation project, which was about Syria. And I analyzed the Syrian case from a theoretical perspective, what they call the Syrian revolution, to see if what happened in Syria was a democratic revolution or it was a regressive revolution, for example. You have a bourgeoisie revolution, you have different types of revolutions that could happen in Syria. And my conclusion was that the driving force behind the uprising against Assad, which is in the, if we want to call it an uprising, it won't lead into democratic change in Syria. And the supervisor didn't like my conclusion, so he never signed on that paper, and I couldn't get my certificate. And I'm a very stubborn person about these cases, and I will not change my dissertation or the graduation project to appease him and to get my certificate, because I believe if I changed, first of all, this will be against my intellectual dignity and my research, and also I will participate in the literature against Syria. Because lots of people publish nowadays books and get approved, and there is no really deep research about what happened in Syria. What you remember, I told you I was one of the people who followed Al Jazeera a lot. And in 2011, Al Jazeera took a big U-turn of how they want to cover what is called the Arab Spring. And the reason for that was because the Democratic Party back then, they struck a deal with Qatar, Hillary Clinton and Obama administration, that Qatar will lead what they call the democratic change in the region. But Qatar supported all the Muslim Brotherhood groups in the region. So if you're going to believe that the Muslim Brotherhood will respect the democratic foundations of any political system, then I would really think that this person is a naive, because the Muslim Brotherhood sees democracy as a train. They take the train, they go to their destination, and once they get into their destination, they jump out of the train. And they start to change the nature of the country, the society, and everything. And so I opposed that. Therefore, my, let's say, dissertation was not accepted. And later, of course, I moved out of Lebanon and I came to Germany, and we can speak about that later.
Sounds very interesting. Peter, you have any questions already, or?
Yeah, I think a good follow-up question. I'm not a big YouTube guy. I think I'm too conservative. I just hate video as a format for politics. But so I just had to Google your name, and as you probably know, there's a lot of people out there who call you an Assadist, and that piqued my interest because I remember during the war in Iraq, people like me were called Saddam lovers, which I found hilarious because I had nothing but contempt for Saddam as another client dictator of the U.S. empire. But nonetheless, anyone who was opposing the war was called a Saddam lover. So as a disambiguation, I thought I would ask, are you someone who actually believes that the Syrian government under Assad is the kind of, not ideal, but better than the alternatives, so you support the Assad government in that sense? Or are you just someone who opposed Western military intervention in the civil war and therefore were called an Assad lover?
Actually, when the Iraq war erupted, since you mentioned Iraq, we in Syria, we were indoctrinated to hate Saddam Hussein. And because of the rivalry between the Baathists in Iraq and the Baathists in Syria. I was a kid, we used to hate Saddam Hussein. But when the decision was made to invade Iraq, we all stood against the war. And I remember this was my first demonstration against a war. We were, believe me, in Aleppo, we were hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating against the war. I was just a kid, and they took us from the school. You know, it's a state-sponsored, so we went against the war. And after that, I got more, let's say, I was never passive about politics, but became more active, felt the adrenaline of being in a demonstration against war, against destruction. And when they killed Saddam Hussein, I cried when I saw that scenes, because for me, I knew for sure that this was the day that Iraq is over, as we know it. And when we speak about Iraq, Iraq is one of the cradles of civilizations in the region. And many of the civilizations pass through Iraq. So when you destroy a country and you destroy the morale of the people, and then you divide them on sectarian lines, and you keep that as a status quo, then in a decade or two or three, people get socially engineered to accept that. Mm-hmm. And we know in 2003, when the war happened in Iraq, and the foreign secretary of state of the United States, he came to Syria, and he asked Assad back then that he wants Assad to stop supporting Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and never dare to support the resistance in Iraq, and reduce the relationship with Iran, etc., etc. All these demands, right? And Assad told him, no, we're not going to do that. So this was the American demands to Syria, not to democratize the country, not to release the political prisoners, for example. They don't care if you have thousands of political prisoners if you are pro-American foreign policy in the region. This is the hypocrisy behind the American approach in the region. If they really care about democracy and human rights, they should start with their allies in the region and not with us, right, in Syria. Mm-hmm. So for me, I got all these experiences, Iraq, Palestine, invasion of Lebanon 2006, and then the massacres in the Gaza Strip 2007 and 2008. This has created conviction in me that the United States foreign policy approach cannot be the correct one. So when in 2011, they have said that Assad must go, Assad must leave, in the first 3 months, we in Syria, we were persuaded and we thought that this is a genuine democratic movement in the country that will lead into democratic change. And personally, back then, I thought like, oh, fine. If there is going to be democratic change in Syria, and I'm a grad of international relations and diplomacy, then personally and academically and even professionally, I will have more opportunities in Syria, right? So even on a personal level, I would have been more motivated for a change in Syria than to preserve the current system. However, when you go to the street and you see the demonstrators against Assad, right? When you see the amount of casualties among the police and among the security forces, it raises lots of questions. It's not possible in June 2011, you see videos published by the rebels themselves slaughtering 120 security forces and tell me this is going to lead into democratic change. You're not going to convince me that the people are saying that the Alawites must go to coffins and the Christians must go to Beirut, that this will lead into democratic change. Those were the slogans at the beginning of the crisis in Syria. So when Hillary Clinton came and Obama said that Assad must go, I was convinced that these neocons, especially Clintons and the Victoria Nulands and Bidens and all these people in the administration cannot be on the right side of history. And I know that they want to remove Assad for the sins that he didn't commit and not for the sins that he committed. And Assad made mistakes in Syria, and some of them are horrible. For example, the economic liberalization of Syria was too quick that it created a huge disparity between the middle class and the upper middle class and the lower middle class. All of a sudden, many people in the middle class found themselves in the poor, in the below middle class, like us in Syria. My father was in the middle class, but because of the shift in the nature of the economy, it required people to have more highly educated certificates, for example, and working more in technical or engineering or banking, etc., etc. All of a sudden, people who are 22 years old with a certificate in banking can find good jobs, and people like my father who are 30 years in the market cannot adapt with these changes in the economy. So many people started to feel contempt against the government. I totally understand that. And many of these people who went to the street, they had grievances and they had legitimate demands from the government to raise the livelihood of the people. But who is the driving force behind or the organizing the demonstrations? Who is going to bear the fruit of this, right? So you see, every Friday you have demonstration against Assad. Where are the demonstrations are coming from? 99% of them are from the mosques. And which mosques? All of them were either funded by Qatar or by Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis and the Qataris, they have huge influence over the communities in Syria because of the petrodollar and because of many of them come to Syria in the suburbs and they marry Syrian women, for example, from the suburbs of Damascus, right? They were a family relationship and also their petrodollar power over the region overall. So when you see all this money is pumping into the country and going to the what they call the clerics and the imams are saying we have to wage jihad, the holy war against Assad because he's an infidel, da 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 da. And you see all these clerics in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, like for example Sheikh Al-Qaradawi, who recently passed away. He used to live in Doha, and he said every person, civilian or military personnel, who supports Assad in Syria, it is permissible to kill him. He gave a fatwa to kill hundreds of thousands of Syrians live on Al Jazeera, and this led into mayhem in the country. Buses are driving in the highways, they get kidnapped. People are being killed on their religious and sectarian identities. So this was all overall indications that this is not going to lead into a democratic change or keep the mosaic of the society, but rather it will lead more into theocracy. And the people who received the money and the arms from the foreign powers, especially in the region, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, even Israel and the United States, those were not progressive movements. Those were regressive movements. On TV, you see people wearing suits, like beautiful suits, and speaking all this beautiful talk to the TV and say like we are leading a democratic change in the country. But these people live in Paris, they live in Berlin, and they live in Ankara. They're not in Syria. They're not leading the movement in Syria. The people who led the movement in Syria are Abu Hayyan, Abu Anedan, Abu Mhesni. All these people, Saudis, Egyptians, Chechens, Uzbekis, they all came to Syria for a holy war against Assad because they consider him an infidel leader. All these cliches, right? So of course I don't think that any person who wants to preserve the multiculturalism of Syria and to preserve the civilizations in Syria would like to see his country slipping into such a one-colored society, for example. So who is carrying the fight against these people? It's Assad. If Assad left the country in 2011 because they gave him asylum, they said you can go to Moscow, you can go to Iran, you can go to China, and we give you all the money you need because we are already going to spend this money on Syria to remove you from power. So take it and leave. If he took the money and left, I would have called him a traitor. So for me, it doesn't matter if it's Assad or if it's George, or if it's Ali, or if it's Hussein, or if it's Omar, whoever is the president, he has the duty to defend his country. And what happened here is, at least we know from the WikiLeaks documents, and we know from when Trump ended the covert operations in Syria, CIA spent every year $1 billion to finance covert operations in the country. And this was leaked in 2017, and the name of the program was Timber Sycamore. And in parallel, the Pentagon had similar program to finance and train and arm all these, what they call the insurgents against Assad. So all in all, when you see this, you know that the reason they want to remove Assad are, in my opinion, few. One, his position on the Arab-Israeli conflict, that they didn't sign the peace treaty and they didn't push the Palestinians under the bus. Their support, tangible support to the armed groups against Israel. They supplied Hezbollah with weapons and ammunition that no other non-state party has received. And Hezbollah took many of these weapons to Gaza. And the proof of that is when in 2011 Hosni Mubarak fell, Hezbollah sent some of its commandos to Egypt to liberate some of its detained smugglers in Egypt because there was a chaos. So they had people smuggling weapons into the Gaza Strip, including the Cornet rockets, for example, including some of the Chinese missiles that Syria bought from our taxpayer money, and then they sent them to Gaza, right? So this was the first reason. The second reason is they wanted to kick the Russians out of the Mediterranean. After they occupied Libya, they want to kick the Russians out of the Mediterranean. The third reason is, again, this is very, very important. Qatar wanted to extend its gas pipelines to Saudi Arabia, from Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, and from Turkey to Europe. So Qatar was going to replace the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines of Russia into Europe. So the Qataris came and they offered Assad in 2008 and 2009, and they were friends. The Qatari emir used to come to Syria like it's his home, you know, like they were just having like as if they're drinking wine every night together, you know. This was the relationship between them. And Assad said no, because he knows that Russia is his strategic ally, and if he stabs the Russians in his back, then the Russians will suffer in terms of the energy, and this will change the entire global geopolitical dynamics in Europe if Russia loses its leverage, the energy leverage over Europe. So Assad said no. And the Qataris and the Turks, who were going to benefit from it immensely if these gas pipelines reached to Europe, they were the two countries who were the most excited about removing Assad from power. Turkey opened all the borders for the multinational jihadists to come to Syria, and Qatar pumped billions of dollars into Syria. And recently, when Hamad bin Jassim, the former foreign minister of Qatar, was on a national Qatari TV, he confessed that how much of a support they gave to the insurgents in Syria through two operation rooms, one in Turkey and one in Jordan, which included the Saudis, the Qataris, and the American CIA. And they pumped billions. In my estimates, over $200 billion they spent in this regime change war. They failed, but the Syrians didn't win this war. Syria is nowadays fragmented. Americans occupy 1/3 of the country. The jihadists occupy Idlib, Turkish occupation forces, American occupation forces, presence of all sorts of forces in Syria. And the Israelis are now, they're not deterred. Because remember, before 2013, Israel was deterred. They didn't dare to bomb every day Syria without an impunity, because Syria had chemical weapons back then. Syria had something to threaten Israel. Now Syria doesn't have that. They took the chemical weapons from Syria in 2013 after the false flag attack and I say it with high conviction, false flag attack in August 2013. They took it from Syria. And Syria is now naked in front of Israel. The Russians do not want to give all the sophisticated air defense systems to Syria because they don't want for Syria and Israel to have a major conflict in the region at the moment. And the presence of the Iranian advisors and the forces is also encouraging more or provoking Israel more to bomb Syria. And every week there is a bombing of Syria by Israel.
And to what extent? So you talk about Qatar and Saudi Arabia, of course, and even about the fatwa. But to what extent would you say that the United States is behind that? I mean, what is the power play here? Is it a lot of independent behavior by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, or would you say no, America is the big bad boy behind that?
The the program, which was called Timber Sycamore, it was tasked to Qatar. And this was said by Hamad Ben Jassim on the Qatari national TV. He said that in 2011, the Americans tasked us, I'm quoting him, tasked us to lead the Syrian file. Okay. And in 2013, when the Qataris failed, because the expectations were like few months and Assad will leave the country. I mean, they will be able to overthrow him like they did with Gaddafi. And this was wishful thinking. Anyone who knows Syria and how the regime is established since the days of Hafiz al-Assad and the number of the security apparatuses and the way that the military operates, it's impossible in 3 months. And many people in Syria told me at the beginning of the war, and also professors, some of them were advisors in the presidential palace, that 3-4 months and they're going to leave, because the Americans, they were contacting them in secret and telling them, don't side on with Assad. We're going to remove him from power, and you will stay without jobs. You will kill your career. You will just be like a former Assad official. So be now neutral or side with the opposition, and then you continue having your job opportunities in Syria, right? Everybody in Syria, from these so-called intellectuals who deserted and went to Jordan, to Lebanon, to Qatar, to other places, thought that Assad is going to leave in a few months. But in 2013, when Qatar failed to overthrow Assad through the military means and the political means and all the covert operations, they killed what is called Khalit al-Azmi. Khalit al-Azmi means like the nest of the crisis. So there was a team of 6 officers and generals, very high ranking, who were managing the war affairs in Syria between 2011 and 2012. And they killed all of them in a assassination. They killed all of them. They bombed their office. They killed all of them, right? So didn't crumble. The regime didn't crumble. So the Americans were upset with this, and they didn't want for Qatar to continue with this fight. So what happened in 2013? The guy who came as the head of the intelligence in Saudi Arabia was Bandar bin Sultan. And Bandar bin Sultan, he has a very close ties to the neocons in the United States. He used to be called, when he was an ambassador of Saudi Arabia in the US, Bandar Bush.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I've heard about him.
So Bandar Bush came as the head of the Saudi intelligence in Saudi Arabia in 2013. And in the same year, look at this sequence of the events. The Qatari former ruler, he stepped down. And his son came to power, and then the change happened in Saudi Arabia. Bandar bin Sultan came to power. Bandar collected all the foreign ministers and intelligence heads of the intelligence in the Arabic and the Gulf states, and he told them, this is again according to Hamad bin Jassim, the former foreign minister of Qatar. He said, we have to collect $2 trillion to remove Assad from power this year. $2 trillion. If I want to write now these numbers, I don't know how many zeros I should put next to 2. Of course, they couldn't collect 2 trillions. The Qataris didn't contribute much in this because they know now the Saudis are going to lead. But they collected above $200 billion to remove Assad from power. And they failed again. And Hamad says that when we failed between 2011 and 2013, Americans who tasked us this file, they gave it to the Saudis and they told them to lead these operations. So between 2013 and 2018, the Saudis led this regime change war in Syria. In 2018, everything has changed. Everything has changed because the Russians in 2015, when they intervened, they were not playing games with no, they were obliterating the Saudi-backed, the Qatari-backed, and the US-backed and the Turkish-backed, all these finance groups. They obliterated them. First, what they did, they focused on the financial lines. How are these groups are financed? Okay, ISIS has become a state because they conquered the oil fields. So they're sending all these oil tankers to Turkey. And Erdogan's son, Bilal, he was the guy receiving the oils and selling it to this black market in Syria, in Turkey. So ISIS now has a steady flow of income. So what the Russians did, they published satellite images showing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of oil tankers are going to Turkey every day from Syria. ISIS is sending all this oil there. So they burned them down, right? And then they started the aerial campaign, and the Hezbollah forces played an instrumental role. The Syrian, of course, army, the Iranian advisors, they all participated in one way or another, and they shifted like the balance of power, and they turned the table upside down. I think the last straw was in 2016 when liberated the city of Aleppo, and then they focused on Deir ez-Zor and on Damascus. And after the Ghouta were all cleansed by the Jaish al-Islam, Ahrar al-Sham, and all these groups there, the Saudis gave up. The Saudis gave up, and there was already some changes happening in Saudi Arabia. MBS came to power, and MBS had a different vision of foreign policy, which is like he wants to. He even said this on TV that he doesn't want to export Wahhabism anymore. They were tasked by the Americans to do that in the past, in Afghanistan, in Xinjiang, in other places. Now they don't want to do this anymore, and they want to modernize their country, blah, blah, blah. And between 2018 and 2022, there were intense, I would say, security talks between Syria and Saudi Arabia. And now the relations have restored between the both sides. Syria cannot survive in the region without good ties with everyone. They need ties with Saudi Arabia. They need ties with Turkey. They need ties with the Qataris, etc., etc. But Qataris, until this moment, they are not convinced of that. They don't want to have anything to do with Syria. And they take it, in the Arabic world, sometimes in politics, they take it personal. It's like they take it personal. This is not a personal issue. They tried to do everything possible to remove him from power. They now failed. So what's the policy? They don't have a strategy for an end game in Syria. The only thing they are doing at the current moment is to starve the Syrian people. Americans occupy their oil fields and their wheat fields, and the rest are imposing sanctions on Syria. So the people are suffocating. The inflation is unbearable. I just want to give you an example. If in 2018, if you bought this pen for $1, it's now $1,200 or $1,400. Yeah. So it's because of the sanctions, the Caesar Act, etc., etc. And unfortunately, we also have collaborators with the Americans. In Syria, we have many collaborators with the Americans, the SDF, for example, in Syrian Democratic Forces. You have on Al-Tanf border crossing, you have collaborators. And in Washington, D.C., you have all these regime change types who go and beg to the congressmen and congresswomen in DC to increase the sanctions on the Syrian people. They say they are sanctioning the Syrian regime, but this is a big, utter lie, and I will tell you why. Because if you sanction the Syrian central bank, and you sanction and block every sort of transactions from and to Syria, then anything that the people want to buy, to import or export is blocked. You're out of the SWIFT. You cannot do transactions. If I want to send $100 now to Syria, I cannot do that through legal ways. How is it possible? How can you call this targeted sanctions against the regime? Any Syrian cannot have a bank account in the neighboring countries. Any Syrian cannot have a PayPal. Syrians cannot use all these applications that we use on our daily basis in Syria, on Google Apps, stores, etc., etc. Everything is sanctioned. Like if they can to cut the air and the oxygen for the Syrian people, they would do it. Seriously, they would do it.
Yeah, and I think that is something that the sanctions are always intended to do, of course. But sorry, Peter, you wanted to ask a follow-up question?
No, I was just going to say, like the thinking in the blob in DC is always that sanctions will somehow make the people rise up and overthrow the government, as if the people are too stupid to realize where the sanctions are coming from. And somehow, I can't think of any example. Perhaps there's one or two in history, but none come to mind of sanctions causing so much pain that people rise up and overthrow their own government when the sanctions are actually imposed by without.
This is actually stated in, there is a leaked document, for example, when they sanctioned Yugoslavia. This was exactly written in a CIA document and memo that this is the purpose of these sanctions. They put sanctions on a country so that they provoke the people to rise against their government, right? In Syria, they have to understand that this is not going to happen. They are... Okay, so before 2018, when before they imposed these draconian sanctions called Caesar Act, the popularity of Assad was, in my opinion, of course, this is just subjective, it's around 65 to 70%, right? Now I think it's below 50% because of the sanctions, because the people have become very impoverished. They're starving. And if you're a father and you want to secure a milk and a bread for your child and you cannot do that, and the government is unable to do that, and you can see the corruption in the government, and you can see these warlords driving their Hummers, they're driving their Lamborghinis, and you see that because of the sanctions, the government cannot provide certain services to the people. What's going to happen is there's going to be parallel economies. And these parallel economies are the people who are either close to the government or part of the government, and they are able to finance their work. So the people are either very poor, below the poverty line, or very rich in Syria. Yeah, they managed to do that. But will the people rise against the government? The answer is no, because the people are already tired after 13 years of brutal war. People are not in a mood to revolutionary mood for change. People who even tried that, they came back and they said, I don't want to do this again. I want to join what is called the reconciliation program, and I want to live my life, go back to my normal life. So imagine the people who stood with Assad or with the army, and they saw that the army saved them from an existential threat against ISIS, Nusra, Qaeda types in Syria. They're not going to rise against Assad just because of the sanctions now. And they're already, as I said, morally and spiritually, they're tired. A revolutionary act needs a revolutionary mood. The people are running after the bread. If they can secure a 2-3 bread per day or a small bottle of milk for the child, that's what they're running after. So this is just sadistic what they're doing to the Syrian people, just like they did to Iraq. And when Madeleine Albright was asked, was it worth it to kill 500,000 children in Iraq? She said, yes, the price we think was worth it, right? This is exactly what she said. They think the same thing now about Syria, but they need someone like Trump to say it, because the rest of the politicians, they're not honest with what's happening in Syria. When Trump comes to power, Trump is someone who says what he thinks and what is really happening. In 2018, he said, so we kept our force just for the oil. We keep the oil. The oil is ours. You cannot say these things when you are an American president. You shouldn't say that. We are there to spread democracy, human rights, and we are there for the sake of the Syrian people, blah, 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 right? But Trump is honest about these cases. No, we are there for the oil. And we keep the oil, we finance our forces in Syria, and we give the rest to the Syrian Democratic Forces. So we occupy 1/3 of the country. And this is the Israeli project. And I will tell you why this is an Israeli project. Because the map, if you put the map of the greater Israel in front of you, it extends from the Nile to the Euphrates River, right? And when you see the theorists who preach about the greater Israel, they say that on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, they will have borders with the Kurdistan. And what they're doing is now on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, they are creating a mini Kurdistan inside Syria, although the Kurds are 30% of the population in the eastern shore of the Euphrates. But because they have the militias and they have the military power, so they can subjugate the rest. The goal is to balkanize Syria, to divide it on sectarian and ethnic lines. And if the Kurds can have a part of there, perfect. And for Israel also to sell itself as a state only for the Jewish people, they need their neighboring countries to be a Sunni state, an Alawi state, a Druze state, all these mini sub-states in the neighbors. If your neighbor is a Druze state or an Alawite state, why you can't be only a state for the Jewish people? The Israelis need in the region these mini states. They need to balkanize the region. This is what they want to, because Syria has a mosaic of over 22 and 23 different ethnicities, religions, and sects. It shows that the region is not what the Israelis claim to be. Because what the Israelis claim to be, that the rest are the savages, the barbarians, and we are the ones who are the civilized, and we have here the progressives and the multiculturals, blah, blah, blah. But that's not true. The real multiculturalism is in Syria, is in Iraq, is in Jordan, because multiculturalism in Syria is a natural progress. It's a natural development. There are centuries and centuries of different civilizations and empires came to Syria, and it happened to be a melting pot for these different civilizations. So you have Greek people in Syria, you have Roman people in Syria, you have different Islamic groups in Syria, Arabs, Aramaic, Akkadis, etc., etc. But this multiculturalism in Syria, as I mentioned, is a natural progress. Unlike in, for example, other countries, like they want to claim that they want to create a multicultural countries in other places. But for example, in Europe, but this is happening in an engineered way. It's a forced upon the people in a very fast way. Like we import people from different countries and we claim to be multicultural. In my opinion, multiculturalism has to be natural progress and not imposed on the people, similarly to democracy. Democracy cannot be whatever that means nowadays in 2024. You cannot impose on the people. The people have to develop their own political system. And in 2024, all the examples are in front of us. It's not necessary for Syria to be what they call liberal democracy, to be developed or to be progressive or to be to overcome all these problems. We have so many examples different around the world, from India, from China, from Russia, that this liberal democracy is not the only formula that can work, right? And but they want to impose this on the people because when you impose on the people and the people are not ready for this formula, what the people are going to do? I'm from an ethnic Armenian background, right? Oh, I go and I only vote for the Armenians to be in parliament. And the same thing will happen to other people. So the example for that is in Iraq and in Lebanon. It will be a sectarian democracy. It's not going to be liberal democracy. If the people are not ready for this formula, everyone will vote for their representative who is from their street or from their religious community. So that's why people say, like, I'm an Assadist. And this is, by the way, what they try to do is to discredit your argument. And if you want to call me an Assadist, fine. But you only prove that you don't have an argument. Because if we speak like this in front, together and exchange ideas, you will find that I have solid arguments, but you don't want to show that. So he's an Assadist. He's paid by Assad. He is the right hand of Assad in Europe, etc., etc. And this is a typical CIA move. The CIA, they created this conspiracy theorist term when the assassination of JFK happened, to discredit all the alternative theories about who killed JFK. And now you are either a conspiracy theorist, you're an Assadist, you're paid by Putin, you're paid by this and that. I mean, alhamdulillah, my bank account is not, it doesn't really indicate that I'm paid by anyone. So let them say whatever they want.
Yeah, it's interesting because like we're political psychologists, so I find it fascinating that it seems like everyone in international relations at least is familiar with the term strategic empathy, and they understand that it's important to understand the beliefs, the way of thinking, even of people that you consider to be enemies. But in discourse in the US, that's what I'm most familiar with, there's just absolutely no ability to perform strategic empathy because they rely on these kind of comic book cutout understandings of what other people believe, and they never bother to investigate what people actually believe, which is what I think political psychology should do. But of course, they just can't perform strategic empathy, and you can see it everywhere. China is probably the best example right now. They just think that the Chinese government has this insane hatred of freedom, and any place they see freedom happening, they get apoplectic and so angry, and they just need to stamp it out. And it's mind-boggling to me how you can, at the one hand, realize on an intellectual level it's important to actually understand other people in the way that they think, but then be completely incapable of actually doing that because you never bother to actually learn what people who disagree with you actually believe.
Yeah, I will give you an example here. We move shifting toward the multipolarity, but under a unipolar world, it's not only political unipolarity, but also a cultural unipolarity. They want to impose on the rest of the world their way of life and their convictions and the lens that they see everything, right? And when you oppose that, they come to your country first. They try to persuade the people. They send their NGOs. They try to indoctrinate the people. They try to do this social engineering like they did in Eastern European countries, many of them. And if it doesn't work, then they bomb you. So the reason is that they want to subjugate you. They want to dominate you culturally, intellectually. They want to dominate you politically, geopolitically, etc. And when you reject that, they come and disseminate your country. They completely destroy. I mean, they destroyed many countries since World War II because of that, right? So first soft power and then hard power. And in this case, it's very interesting when I meet with American intellectuals or American journalists. Some of them come here in Berlin and, they follow my work. They despise me, but they want to meet with me, and it's fine. But when I speak with them, I always get the impression that they disrespect my intellectual capacity because they don't see us in the Middle East as equal intellectually. Their minds are so colonized that they think they can teach us and preach, and they tell us how we should manage our affairs, etc., etc. And when you push back against their these silly attempts, they hate you. They like the Syrians in Germany if you are kissing their hands, but they despise They despise Syrians like myself, who are proud of being Syrian. If you're in Germany, and there are many, unfortunately, who are from the opposition side, when they receive their German passport, for example, they come on video and they tear apart their Syrian passport, and they say, "I was reborn again today." So those are the types of Syrians that they love. And myself, I don't get any job opportunities. If I apply to any scholarship, I get rejected, and everything you do is rejected. So they put you in a ghetto, and this is an economic ghetto that you can't make a living and you can't advance in your career, etc., just because you have the wrong opinion according to them. So when I meet these people and I look at them when they speak to me, like I truly ask them this question, and I say, "Do you think I'm stupid?" And they get shocked because I ask this question often. And I say, "Do you think I'm stupid?" He says, "No. Why do you ask that?" I say, and I tell them, "Why do you treat me like I'm stupid? Why do you treat me like a stupid person? Like I cannot really connect the dots or understand what you're doing in Syria. Like, do you really think that we don't know what you're doing in Syria?" And they start talking about chemical attacks and all this stuff. And this is something interesting that we have to address. Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. Like, it's just like in the morning he woke up and he chose to use chemical weapons and on the civilians, not on the militants, right? And the first question we ask them, which chemical attack are you referring to? If we want to put all the chemical attacks real and alleged, because some of them were real, then the conversation will be very silly and we're not going to reach to any point. So let's start with what happened in 2013. In March 2013, the first chemical attack happened when a sarin was used against the Syrian army position in Aleppo. And the Syrian government called the UN to send its inspectors and see what happened there because their soldiers were killed. And the UN postponed and postponed and postponed their trip to Syria for 6 months. And they arrived on the night of 18th of August 2013. And they arrived on the night of 18th of August, and the 19th, they went to the ministry and they checked they need licenses to go to this place, and they checked what type of security and guards are going with them because it's a war zone, right? This was the 19th. And the night of the 19th, so after midnight, when it became 20th, a chemical attack happened on the suburbs of Damascus, 10 kilometers away from where the inspectors were. And this led to the abortion of the initial mission of the UN inspectors to go to Aleppo and check who used chemical weapons against the Syrian forces. And what happened is when the UN inspectors were in Syria, they said, "We don't want to go anymore to Aleppo. Now we want to go to Damascus, to the suburbs of Damascus, to see what happened there." So they aborted the initial mission, and they want to tell me that Assad called the inspectors to come to Syria. And when they were in Syria, in the hotel, he woke up and he said, "Let's use chemical weapons on the suburbs of Damascus." And if we accept Seymour Hersh as a credible investigative journalist, which he is, and he revealed many of this information thanks to his contacts in the US administration. The Brits, they had intelligence assets in Ghouta, and they collected the sarin, and it was a sarin attack, and it killed 1,400 people. But whose sarin was this? And when the Brits analyzed it, because Obama took a decision to bomb Syria on the 30th of August. It was after 2 weeks, they already decided to bomb Syria. And the Brits, they sent a secret memo to the Americans. They said, the materials that we collected from Syria doesn't belong to the Syrian sarin stockpile. This is something else. And we are being played in Syria. So the Obama was, if you remember what he did, he pulled the brakes and he said, now I want to go to the Congress and I want to get the approval of the Congress, because he knew that Assad didn't use gas attack against his own people, because they had the samples and they know that this was not from the Syrian stockpile, but rather it was sent by Erdogan. So what happened is Erdogan was trying to bring the Americans in to bomb the military installations of Assad, because they were not winning the regime change war through their proxies. They thought, as I told you, that they could remove him in a year or two maximum, but when it took too long, they wanted to create a provocation, because Obama has set a red line, and he said, if a chemical attack happens, then our calculation will change. And surprise, surprise, just 1 year exactly after this statement, a chemical attack happened in Syria, and we were very close to American intervention was going to be a game changer. They were going to bomb everything. They were going to bomb all the energy factories. They were going to bomb the military installations. They were going to bomb the air defenses. They were going to paralyze the Syrian army completely. And they are capable of doing that. So this could have changed everything, this chemical attack in 2030. Everyone has to dig in and learn about these cases, because more people are dying slowly in Syria nowadays because of these lies. And similar lies are being told today about what happened on October 7, and it only takes us a little bit of research to understand what is called the atrocity propaganda. Mm-hmm. So sometimes an atrocity happens, but they exaggerate it. Sometimes never happens, and that's a completely lie. And sometimes it's a false flag attack. And such things happen in international affairs, unfortunately, and it happened so many times in the past. So we have to be aware, because our priority has to be the Syrian people. Who are the Syrian people? We have over 15 million living in Syria nowadays. A vast majority of them live under government-held areas, and we need to ease all these difficulties for the people, right? And not increase sanctions because of all these old lies that they peddled about Syria. And this is why they call me an Assadist, because I reveal these things. And I had the courage to say these things in 2017, because I felt suffocated that all these media outlets are just repeating the same without even questioning if it's genuine or not. So unfortunately, that the German media, when they found me, that I'm doing such videos on YouTube, and they made me famous here. And they put my face on every TV, they called me names, and they said probably I'm sent by Assad, like I'm probably a spy. Yeah, they created huge problems for me here in Germany.
No, sorry, I was just going to say that there's a term in political psychology, or concept from political psychology, about kind of describing what you described when you met with American journalists. It's called naive realism, when you think that everyone sees the world as it is, and the world as it is exactly as I see it. So if you meet someone who disagrees with you, and you have this naive belief that everyone sees the same reality, then the only way to explain the existence of disagreement by somebody else is to say that they're either stupid or they're in bad faith, like they're being paid by somebody to spout untruths. What they don't understand is that, you know, their own information exposure is fundamentally arbitrary. You're born in one country, you happen to be taught one set of ideas, your media diet teaches you one set of ideas. It's almost a full-time job to learn perspectives from all different ideological perspectives, different part of the world. And when you don't actually engage realistically with beliefs and why people believe what they believe about politics, you're left with that. Your enemies are either stupid or they're corrupt, and that's it.
And not just that. I mean, Kevork lives in Germany, and I come from the Netherlands. Okay, we now live in China, so that's a good thing. But in Western Europe, you usually just hear one side of the story, and people are heavily indoctrinated. I mean, during 9/11, I was a young guy, but during 9/11, all you read about was the Western side of the story, and people
Yes.
just believed it. That was the axis of evil over there. And you see that now. You see they try the same thing with not only with Syria, of course, but they also try the same thing with Israel and Palestine. The only difference is that we have a new generation right now that is very tech savvy and that goes onto social media. So they cannot be fed the same lies as back in the day when I was a young guy and I during the war on terror. That was really bad in Western Europe. And I know it's still bad in Western Europe in the mainstream media, but at least you have people like Kevork, people like ourselves. But among the young generation, you have a lot of people who just don't fall for that nonsense anymore. And I've noticed just that people in the Middle East, in the West, whether it's Syrians, but also during the Iraq War, now the Palestinians, but also during the war against Libya, there is just no people just don't feel it when these people are suffering, and it's an immense difference with how people reacted when, for example, Ukrainians had to flee their country. And I remember a video of you, Kevork, about and I wanted to jump to that question, so to change gear a bit. I remember you in a video you said you were actually shocked by how people see the Palestinians in Western Europe, and especially when you check the mainstream media. And I saw a video, and I will post it here for the viewers later on when I edit, where you actually say they're actually less than flies for Europeans, people in Palestine and in general in the Middle East. I must say, whether it's Palestinians or Syrians or Iraqis, people just in general don't care, in Western Europe. And I wanted to ask you, because hey, you are somebody who said that I've also seen you sometimes say like, hey, I'm not somebody who who always thinks there is everywhere is racism or these kind of things. You said, but in this case, I really have to admit, you said like there's some racism going on here. I'm somebody who really thinks there's a lot of racism going on. But what was the moment that you started to see that, and what kind of experiences changed your mind, so to speak?
I think Germany was the biggest lesson of my life. And I have passed through different curves of how I see things. And when I first came to Germany, I had a different impression. And then a few months later, I had a different impression. At some point, I even defended the German politics. And I thought, like, this is the perfect place. You have a freedom of expression. And do I call it a naivety? No, I just call it a learning process. And what happened in that I was always hopeful that one day people will listen, right? And then what happened in the Gaza Strip is completely different of what happened in previous. This is a clear cut in front of our eyes, an onslaught against the people, defenseless people, right? Defenseless people in daylight, all documented on our TikToks, all documented on our mobiles. And then the politicians come and say Israel is only defending itself. I wanna, when I watch them, I have to puke, because what they're basically saying is that these people do not deserve to live. That the 33,000 Palestinians dead were just a collateral damage for Israel to defend itself. What type of message are they sending to the people, right? And when there are many demonstrations happen for Palestine here. How many people go to the demonstrations? The biggest, I would say, Arabic community here is in Berlin. Arabs, of course, contribute in it. The bigger part are from our Arabic communities. But how many? Thousands? Maximum thousands people go to the demonstrations. And then when they wanted to demonstrate against the extreme right wing, this is what they call, over 100,000 people went to the streets to demonstrate against the German right-wing party. So what type of signal are you sending to me that your priority is set that you are pushing against the right-wing party in Germany, but not you're pushing against an actual self-proclaimed genocide against the Palestinian people? The Israelis say, I'm not even analyzing these things, right? They say this is our goal. We have to encourage voluntary migration of the Palestinians from Gaza to the Sinai. And this is ethnic cleansing. And I think the hypocrisy here and the complicity of Western governments with Israel, it just shows that we are nothing but flies for them. And if Israel kills 7,500 civilians per month in the Gaza Strip, it's fine because they are vetoing the UN Security Council resolutions. They are still sending weapons to Israel, and they are forcing the people who are speaking up for the Palestinians to either apologize or they're losing their jobs and many, many other things happening to them, right? So the people are paying a huge price for speaking up for what is right in Palestine. And I meet usually with people in the journalists, and some of them are politicians, by the way. And one of the politicians that I met, whose party is in the coalition now, and he was speaking about the atrocities of Putin in Ukraine. And when he finished his conversation, and I asked him, so how do you feel about Gaza? And I let him speak like 10 minutes about how horrible it is, the situation in Ukraine. And then when I say Gaza, he was like, he just took one step back, and he's like, look, Israel is a special case for us, and we have to protect, we have to. I was like, you just shifted you entire, like you were speaking about something that 1/10 of the suffering that happened in Ukraine, and you were exaggerating and exaggerating and exaggerating. And when I spoke about Gaza, you already took a step back and you said it's a special case.
And who was this? Who was this, Kevork?
He's a politician, and his political party is now in the coalition here in Germany.
Germany, okay, yeah.
And he said, look, he said, even if Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, we have to be on the side of Israel. This is what he told me. We have to, he said. It's not like we want to, we have to be on the side of Israel. And I think the reputation and the respect toward the West has completely finished now. The global South, and I know I'm generalizing now, but many countries in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in China, in the Middle East are confronting Western politicians while they stand next to them. And they're telling them what they think boldly to their faces. I think if the West wants to, if any empire, I would say, wants to continue governing the world, they have to at least gain the respect of the people who subjugate it, right? And these people are now pushing against them. The vast majority of the people in the global South despise what is called the rules-based order. And you see the double standards in Ukraine compared to if one bomb falls over a residential building in Kiev now, all the mainstream media, all the politicians take their planes and they go to Kiev, and they going like it's a Mecca, you know, like a Hajj to Kiev. And then you see bodies shattered, like you don't even know who is this person anymore in Gaza. The bombs are from Germany, the bombs are from the United States. They say nothing about it, and they're still speaking about self-defense. So I lost my complete respect, you know, to what is called the establishment, and I feel like I'm an alien here. And if I was, I didn't used to call myself a refugee here or a migrant. Like I wanted to be part, you know, like I work, I pay my taxes. I'm nice to my neighbors. I have a dog. I go to the cultural clubs. I participate in the society. You know, I want to be part of it. But I feel an alien now in the society. I feel alone. I'm very happy that my wife, she's German, but she's very awake, and she didn't know much about the Palestine case. And when the October 7 events happened, she asked me, what do you think? And I told her, go and watch and read about the Palestine conflict, and then we discuss together. And she went 1 week, and she came back, and she was like, okay, so we have Balfour Declaration, we have the all the migration waves to Palestine, and then grabbing the land, and then the Haganas, and then all these militias, and then the UN resolution to partition. And she became aware very quickly the injustice inflicted upon the Palestinian people. And she's very active now in the pro-Palestine scene. And as I told you, she also loses her job opportunities because of that. So everyone suffers for standing on the right side. And therefore, when I say, like, when this coalition comes after you, you know that you're doing something right. They wouldn't come after people who are peddling their lies. And I have had enough. I'm sick and tired of them just destroying our countries and then playing the nice face to you and showing their nice faces. No, it's enough. We have had enough of destruction in our region. They have created millions of refugees. They killed millions of people. And what's happening in Gaza shouldn't just pass like this. We have to bring them to justice, and we have to hold them accountable. They are complicit with what they're doing with Israel in Gaza. And if Gaza is over, they will come after West Bank. I'm 100% sure about that. They will not stop until ethnically cleanse all Palestinians. And they say it publicly. So no, we have to say no. We have to learn to say no.
So what you actually experienced, I guess, Kevork, is a bit of a speed course or a speed development of what I actually experienced in my own country. So I'm born and raised, of course, in the Netherlands, and my mother is Dutch, and my father is Algerian, and for me, it was for me the same, but then on a longer trajectory, I've always felt very happy in my country, and I felt very Dutch, and what for me was a radicalizing experience was 9/11. I just saw the way it was spoken about people in the Middle East, and how it just completely transformed the society into such an one-sided, very racist society. And at that point, like you said, okay, I never called myself a refugee. You said that you mingled with the people and everything, but suddenly you felt estranged from the country when you saw it. For me, that happened during and after 9/11. And it was also, I must admit this, it was also one of the reasons why I actually chose to leave my mother country and live in China, where I live now already for a long time. I also lived in Malaysia. And I must say, I'm very happy I can do that, because sitting from a distance and being able to say what I want, about geopolitical issues, because my opinion here is actually an okay opinion. But if you would do that in the Netherlands, like you say, I would feel a foreigner in my own country. I would feel literally a foreigner in my own country.
Actually, I do feel a foreigner now. I lived in Germany for 8 years. I didn't treat myself as a foreigner in this country. I learned the language quickly, and I participated in the society. But now I feel like if I get killed by an Israeli anywhere, it's just like, okay, he died. This is going to be the reaction. He died. He had the wrong opinion. So I don't feel like my life is respected. And I should have known this quicker, because when they came after me here, and they endangered my life. And this is a state TV channels. I mean, they call it a public TV, but those are journalists who work for the government, right? And when they came after me and they smeared me and they waged what is called character assassination, I told them that when you do these things and you put my face on TV and you put me on newspapers and you call me this and that, I mean, there are people from my country who hate Assad, and they will find me as a boogeyman, and they will start like harassing me or try to hit me and to do this and that. And I thought that they will understand that, but apparently they knew it and they did it on purpose. So you walk in the street, and some of the Syrians who came from Syria and who hate Assad think you're a boogeyman, and they want to insult you, they want to hit you, they want to fight with you. And until the time that somebody, I saw with my own eyes that he was carrying a knife, and he started to run after me. And what happened is, because I'm a sportive, I'm fast, he cannot catch me anyways, and especially when you're in a dead end life situation. And when he lost his hope and he escaped the scene, And when the police came and they took the eyewitnesses and everything, they didn't include the eyewitnesses in the report. Some Turkish guy told them that he saw what happened, and they didn't include it in the report. And then the court closed the case, and they said it's not in the public interest to continue in this case. And the police said there is no evidence that he was carrying a gun. So I turned to be a liar here, that I just was making up stuff, right? And according to the official media report, is that he was carrying a mobile in his hand, running after me, right? He was going to hit me with a mobile, according to them. So, and since then, I just once tagged a German journalist because he was obsessed with me. I don't know why. And I said, if something happens to me, this is the guy to be blamed. And since then, he stopped harassing me. But they destroy you. So this is also narrative war, you know. They're spending millions of dollars per year for this to create narratives. And someone like me coming behind his desk, it's just you have these balloons of lies and you have the needle, you know, and then you destroy the balloons of lies. They will not accept that. They will come after you. So it's a dangerous place to live if you want to continue in such a career and a job, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I haven't heard. This is kind of a different story, but I have a Jewish American friend who moved to Germany like 10 years ago, and what he told me about, you know, like as a Jewish person critiquing Israel or the Israeli government, Israeli military in Gaza, the reactions he gets from Germans just kind of blow my mind. It's like that country is just it's such a case study for political psychology, like how I forget exactly how the kind of responses he would get, but of course he would cause massive cognitive dissonance when he would be a Jewish person critiquing the Israeli government, and Germans would just, you know, they wouldn't know what to say. But
they're even arresting Jewish radical
Yes.
Jews in Germany, right, Kevork?
Yeah, they are arresting. There are two women who go all the time to these demonstrations, and they carry the banner Jews against the genocide or something like that. And I met them a few times in these demonstrations. They're very, very nice ladies. And the other day there was an event here. It's like an Oscars, you know. It's called Berlinale, and they give prizes to the movies and the producers of the movies. And one of the movies that won was about Palestine. And the producers were one Israeli Jew, and the other one was Palestinian, and Palestinian from Palestine. And both gave a speech, and the Israeli guy said, in a few hours, we will go back to Israel, and one of us will live in freedom, and the other one will go to an apartheid. One of us will live under civil law, and the other one will go to apartheid under military law, etc., etc. And this has to stop. And the Palestinians said that please stop sending weapons to Israel. And the second day, the German press, they waged a brutal campaign against these two, especially against the Israeli guy. It's funny, like they accused an Israeli Jewish person with anti-Semitism by a journalist who's not even a Jewish. It's like what is this? What's happening? You know. Therefore, I don't really waste my time about these accusations, anti-Semitism, and all these things. Assad is those are just to end the conversation. And when you end the conversation, what do you expect to happen if there is no conversation? If we humans, we cannot talk, what's the other way to communicate among each other? It's fighting, right? It's violence. So what they're doing is basically they're preparing the ground for violence, societal violence. And this is very dangerous because we have a Palestinian community here, and they have all the right to feel contempt about what's happening in the Gaza Strip. But when you silence everyone, what do you expect them to do? If you don't let them to speak, if you don't allow them to speak, what do you expect them to do next, right? And yeah, it's very sad. It's very, very sad what's happening in Germany. You see their role in Ukraine, and their gas pipelines were destroyed, and they don't do anything about it. And now with the Gaza, I don't want to say much about this in details because I don't have suicidal thoughts. Still live in Germany, so let's say that it's just sad, very, very sad.
So
Oh, go
Following
ahead.
up, just a quick point related to your story. That Jewish filmmaker, after being criticized by that German Christian, I guess, said like, you're endangering my life because back in Israel, the fanatics, threatened me. I believe he said that his family was threatened, something like that. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's just so ironic that Germans are putting Jewish lives in danger while thinking that they are somehow absolving themselves for the historical crime of the Nazis. It's just
Mhm.
it's such an odd situation from the account I've heard from my friend there. It's
Yeah.
hard for me to understand.
Only in Germany you can write an article in a public press. It's a famous one, and you write the title, "There are no innocent civilians in Gaza," and the cover photo of the article is your face. It's like I have never seen someone who puts his face as a cover photo of the article and writes such a title. There are no innocent civilians in Gaza, and it happens here. And nothing happens. Now change that and say
Yeah.
there are no innocent civilians in Israel.
And
What
show your
happens?
face. And
And
show
show
your
your
face.
face. And show your face. Look what happens. Look what happens to you. It's like it's crazy, you know.
Yep.
So
Yep.
please don't preach about human rights and democracy to us ever again. It's done.
Yep.
So this makes me more confident and sure that my position on Syria was correct, because it can't be that they wanted to export to us the democratic rule and order and human rights. They wanted a puppet government in Damascus, so that Syria becomes a client state for the US, and then they strike a peace deal with Israel, which is a surrender deal, of course, and they push the Palestinians under the bus and never support any of the groups in the region who are fighting against Israel. And imagine what would happen. I mean, now in the 2024, the only two parties who are actively fighting, doing something about Gaza, are the Yemenis and the Hezbollahs in Lebanon, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the rest are, I mean, Syria is completely already in a very bad situation. If Syria does anything, shoots one bullet on Israel, all these active cells in the country, we have 100,000 fighters waiting for their opportunity to conquer more land in Syria. Syria has to finish this first before restoring its role in the region. I think what happened in Gaza, it damages the image of Israel forever. There is no way back from this. I don't think that they will be able to just repair and put some makeup on their faces ever again. And we will not forget about that. And we will continue telling the next generation and next generation what they did, because this can't be just um, they can't just get away with it. This is done. I think the Zionists know it, and that's why they are desperate and they're trying to expand the scope of the conflict in the region, because in their point of view, if they can't decisively score a victory against the Hamas and jihad in Gaza, they need American intervention. And the Americans are not going to intervene if there is no larger war in the region. So they're
Mhm.
trying to
Mhm.
provoke Lebanon into coming into this conflict. If this conflict also spreads to Lebanon, I mean, I've said this many times. People who haven't followed Hezbollah's growth in the past, they don't know what's going to happen to Israel. They're going to lose big time if Israel dares to wage a ground offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're going to lose this war big time, and they know it. And there is a report by over 100 Israeli security officials and politicians who prepared a report now after the October 7 events, assessing the strength of Hezbollah and saying, look, we can destroy Lebanon, but they can destroy Israel too. This is a mutually assured destruction. And in our case, if the airports are hit and we don't, where the Air Force is going to land, and how are we going to bomb back Lebanon if this happens? If our
Mhm.
ports are destroyed, if our airports are destroyed, then we will need the intervention of the US, right? So I think it's the goal of Netanyahu to expand the scope of the war. Therefore, the regional players are showing more self-restraint, I believe. it's not in anybody's interest to go into direct war against now a nuclear Israel who feels like they're cornered, right? I don't suspect at all. Like I have no doubts that they would use nuclear weapons if they think that's the right solution. They activated it in 1973, so they would do it again, and they would use it. I'm sure about that. So they have to find a way out in how to deal with Israel without Israel using nukes.
I agree with you. I also think that they would be crazy enough to use nuclear weapons. But I must honestly say that I also think the United States, when it really sees it's losing its empire, is willing to use nuclear weapons. Kevork, you have been very generous with your time, which is really nice. You also give extensive answers, which is always fantastic to have a guest like that. Can we ask you one last question before we let you go? Great. So there's one thing we were very interested in, and maybe you, because you come from the Middle East, maybe you have a bit of a more of an answer to that. So what we wonder was the following. Many analysts said that especially at the beginning of the onslaught on Gaza by Israel, many analysts said that okay, the population in the Middle East, or I should say West Asia and North Africa, will probably be so angry and so riled up by this invasion that they will actually force their governments to do something. You know, that everybody expected, like, okay, there are many governments that are probably don't want to do anything, like Saudi Arabia, for example, Jordan, but this is so outrageous what's happening now. Probably there will be so much support for the Palestinians that even these governments have to do something. But to be honest, there's not much happening in that sense. What are we missing? Do you have any idea why that is?
Actually, the street in the Arab world is on the side of Palestine decisively, right? And the mood is there, the pulse is there, everything is there. This is something that I always say. People keep telling me that even if Syria or Egypt strike a peace deal with Israel, the people will stay anti-Israel, etc., etc., and that is true. But who moves the chess? Right, is the government. Who owns the Jacobian force is the government. Who owns the exclusive right to use violence is the state. So if the state has commitments, security commitments, financial commitments, in the case of Egypt, they have, unfortunately, they tied themselves. They tied themselves with the accords with Israel, the Camp David Accords, and then they got huge amount of loans from the IMF. They tied themselves with security deals with the United States. That the United States is giving them military aid, etc., etc., etc. So Egypt has to completely reshuffle its position if they want to play any constructive role in this regard, right? And that's they see, and I'm not defending them at all because that's wrong what they're doing in Gaza. They see that that is suicidal. It needs like a Sadat movement, but the other way around. Sadat completely reshuffled everything against the Soviets, and he brought the Americans to the region, right? And see, even UNRWA, which the Americans and the Europeans stopped the funding, the Arabic countries can, with like this, can finance on UNRWA, right?
Yeah.
And they're not doing that.
Right.
And if I want to compare it to how much money they spent in Syria, it drives you crazy. It drives you crazy because they had all the money to spend in Syria and to destroy half the country, but they don't have the money to help even for humanitarian aid the Palestinians, right? It's mind-boggling because remember what they did in Syria. They asked all the radical clerics in the region to issue fatwas to go for holy war against Syria, and now how many of them are issuing similar fatwas to go to Palestine?
Exactly. That's such a good point. That's such a good point.
It's like we had over 120,000 multinationals coming to Syria to fight. And those came because of fatwas. And where are similar fatwas now? I'm not saying they should do it. I'm just asking where are these fatwas now to go and help their Palestinian brethren. That's why I say the states in the region are so corrupted and they hold the exclusive like they have the grip over such geopolitical cases. And it seems some of the governments want just to finish the Palestinian conflict. And what is stopping them from finishing the Palestinian conflict is these few non-state actors left in the region who are still fighting against Israel. So they fought against the Houthis in Yemen for many years to destroy them. They couldn't. And they tried to do many, many times with Hezbollah. They couldn't. And yeah, it's I feel very sad when I see all these Arabic countries are now in Ramadan and having their pleasant times and eating with their families, etc., etc. And when I just open my Instagram and the first reel, I see a little girl, 4 years old, 5 years old, she's starving in Gaza. And Palestine has to be the priority of the Arab people. I mean, the people are, but what they have, what can the Arabic people now do? Like march to Palestine? And the governments are blocking, like even creating walls now between the Gaza Strip and Rafah, and to block any sort of exodus or any sort of people coming from the Egyptian side, right? I truly believe that Israel will not compromise unless there is a credible threat against them. And this is only going to come if they attack Lebanon. I'm being very honest with you. If they attack Lebanon, there's going to be credible threat against them, and I think it will be very huge miscalculation from the Israeli side. I know, like as a person of the region, I don't wish that this war expands. But at the same time, I see that what's happening in Gaza, the only thing can stop it is force. Who is able to stop it? The ICJ? Of course not. Who's going to stop it? The Biden administration? Is going to stop it MBS? Nobody can stop it. Unless there is a credible security threat against Israel, this could stop. And this is the realistic approach. And unfortunately, I would say the vast majority of the Arabic governments, they are uninterested in that. They have a vision, economic vision. They want to cooperate, coordinate, and they want to build their countries, but on a formula that Israel is going to be partner with them. So let's see how will that work for them.
But just a quick follow-up. Following the same logic of a credible threat, you're saying basically that the various Gulf dictators don't see a credible threat in their own populations?
No, I mean against Israel. If there is a credible threat against Israel, a military threat.
No, what
I
Peter
mean,
means is like, don't you think that the public opinion of so many Arabs in their nations is a threat to them?
No. So nothing is going to happen. The people, when they live in welfare and they live in a good economic situation, especially in the Gulf countries, they're not going to rise. Their priorities are completely different. Have you been to Dubai recently? People are just busy about buying the next watch, buying the next iPhone, and which car is going to be the next the housing they're going to buy. It's a completely, like, I mean, even my friends, Syrians who recently moved to Dubai, it's a very consumerist society that even their mentality has changed, you know? You become more obsessed about things rather than people. So in Syria, it's not the case. It's not like that. We're completely different mentality in Syria. And people are generally very empathetic towards the suffering of other people. That's why when the Iraqi refugees came, they were treated nicely. When the Palestinian refugees lived as citizens in Syria. They didn't have a Syrian passport, but they have the right to own, and they had the right to buy, and they had the right to open businesses, and they had the right to do any sort of activity they want in the country, right? In Lebanon, they live in tents. They live in, sorry to say, as Trump says, shitholes. But in Syria, it wasn't the case. When I went to Yarmouk camp last time in 2010, not last time, I went it after the destruction as well. It was a city. And they were respected in Syria. And I truly hope that I had so much grievances against Hamas because they turned their back against us after the war in Syria. I hope that they learn the lesson this time and see that who stood with them and who stabbed them in the back after this Gaza conflict, because they picked and chose, unfortunately, Turkey and Qatar back then when the Syrian war started.
Right. Okay. There's so many things we could keep asking, but you have already been very generous with your time. Hopefully, we can invite you one time again in the
Inshallah.
future, Kevork. I will keep following your shows. Every time you come online, then or you come live, then here it's 12 o'clock in the night. So I usually lay down in my bed and then watch you and then fall asleep. So that's very good.
Today's
And
live streaming is going to be with Professor Jamal Wakim. He was one of the people who told me, he teach me about geopolitics and about the Ukraine war. So it's going to be very interesting.
nice. So I'll definitely be watching that. And thanks again for coming on. And let's keep in touch. And I'll be
Let's keep in
watching
touch.
you. I'll be watching you tonight probably.
Inshallah.
Yeah, thank you, Kevork.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much, Karim, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. See you.
Bye.
The truth
See
that
you.
Bye.